Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. For another edition of WOWSA Live, we have our host, Ned Denison from Cork, Ireland. Ned?
Hello, everyone. I'm the chairperson of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. One of our honorees is with us today, Julie Ridge. We'll sneak up on why she's so famous and why she's a Hall of Famer. But first of all, Julie, welcome. Tell us about your background before you ended up in the English Channel in 1982, please.
I was a starstruck kid from Virginia who came to New York to be on Broadway. And in 2 years, I actually got a job in a Broadway show. For people who know about Broadway, it was called Oh Calcutta, and it was notorious for having nudity on stage. And I was in that show, and I was swimming in my swimming pool at my gym, which is in Midtown Manhattan, and a lot of cool people swim there. And I was just swimming and swimming and swimming because the show was at night and I didn't have that much time and I didn't have that much to do. And a friend of mine who's actually kind of a big star now, but he wasn't a recognizable name then. He swam 2 miles a day in the pool and he broke his wrist. And I thought, oh gosh, it's too bad he broke his wrist, but he can't swim his 2 miles a day. And I was only swimming a mile a day and I was slow. It was a 45 minute mile. And I adopted his 2 miles and I thought, wow, I just doubled my distance. That was very easy. I'll bet I could swim further. And then I jumped in the pool one day and swam 5 miles. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. I bet I could swim further. And then on New Year's that year, which was 1982, I was having a casual lunch with my dad and I said, Daddy, I want to swim the English Channel on my birthday, which was 9 months away. And I really had never swum more than the 5 miles in a pool at that time. And I had no idea about what it would take to swim the English Channel, except that it was the English Channel. And in my head, that was the only giant swim I had ever heard of that was of any import at all. And I mean, when I was a kid, Broadway was where I needed to be. So when I decided I loved swimming, the English Channel was what I had to do. And learning through not knowing anything and training and training and training and meeting just absolutely amazing people and going to the Swimming Hall of Fame. Jane Katz swam at my pool too. And she was a very dear friend and she gave me a lot of help and she helped me with my terrible stroke. And I went up to Bob Dunkel, the late great Bob Dunkel and the late great Buck Dawson's camps up in Canada. And they laughed at me when they saw my stroke. And I told them I wanted to swim the English Channel, but they helped me and they were really kind and they paddled along as I did very long swims and night swims, and they were laying bets on how long I would last in the water in the English Channel, and nobody thought I would do it. But on my birthday, it was actually September 10th, but if you count for the time factor, 5 hours, it was still my birthday in New York. So it took me 17 hours and 55 minutes. And I did that snake path that turns out like everybody does, but mine was really, really off. I mean, mine was the worst snake path you've seen. And I was closer to Spain, I think, at some point than I was to France. But, and I had no idea about the tides pushing you away from France, and I swam into a head tide for 4 solid hours. And basically, I had Eric Baker was my captain. Cindy, the late great Cindy Nicholas, who was on the 3rd lap of her attempt for a 3-way. She had gotten me Eric because the captain I was supposed to have booked other people ahead of me and I wouldn't have gotten a shot. And Cindy was actually finished with 2 1/3 laps and I was still in the water swimming. But Eric stuck with me and my dad was there and I didn't want to give up. I figured it would be more painful to stop and to have to make all those excuses to everybody than to just keep going. So I kept going and eventually I got there and it was a miracle. And then I came home and I didn't have a job and I didn't have an apartment, and my boyfriend had broken up with me, and a friend from the Manhattan Island Swimming Association, because I was asked to join that year. And that was the first year that was 1981, 82, when Drury Gallagher founded the swim, when we called it the Manhattan Island Swimming Association in the 80s. And all these people are dead now. Joe Copeland was on the committee, and he said, Julie, you know, nobody's ever swum around Manhattan twice. That'd be a good idea. And I was very depressed because I didn't have any swimming goals. And I said, yeah, that'd be a good idea. Of course, I hadn't swum around Manhattan, and I didn't have any idea what that would be like. But I was like, yeah, good idea. I'll do that next summer. So Manhattan was actually very easy compared to the English Channel, because there's nothing to see in the English Channel, and it's cold. And as all of you, both of you have swum around Manhattan. Manhattan is a scenic swim, and it was in the double. I had a nighttime, and it's lit. I mean, in the English Channel, it's pitch dark, and it can be scary. But around Manhattan, it's gorgeous. And it's funny because in your email, you made a note about publicity and comparing it to Diana Nyad. I didn't publicize that swim at all. When I was in Calcutta, I left Calcutta to train for the English Channel because I had to gain weight for the English Channel, and being in the nude on a Broadway stage, even if it was only for 11 minutes, and gaining weight wasn't something my personality could put up with. So I quit the show, and we had a producer who was a great promoter. So as I left the show, he got a lot of publicity for my English Channel swim. And then when I came home and I did the double, it just so happened that the managing editor, who's also dead now, my God, this is all in the 80s. A lot of things happened in 30 years. His name was Gil Rogan. He swam at my swimming pool, and he saw me on a training run. I was doing something like a 12-hour swimming pool, 25-yard swimming pool, 12 hours. That's relevant. Have you guys done that? I mean, that's like, that
Yes.
could be the most, yeah. What else is more boring? Yeah. So I was doing that, and Gil came in and he saw me, and he asked the lifeguard who was handing me my feedings without touching me. He said, who is that? What is she doing? And my friend told him, and he said, wow, that'd be a cool story for Sports Illustrated. So it was time and place. And he put the story, it was a full-length feature before I did the swim. And unknown to me, David Letterman reads Sports Illustrated avidly. And he was waiting for the news. And when it came on, and it was a slow news day. And New York in the 80s was not a safe place. It was a place where most of the news was people getting killed and gang wars. And so a good news story, somebody swimming around Manhattan twice. And also that I was female, and back then I was kind of cute, and I was on Broadway. So I made a good story. So all the news stations came out, and Letterman got word. And that was also back in the day when we had answering machines. And I came home, and there was a message on the answering machine from NBC, from the David Letterman show. And I thought it was a prank. So I called the number back, and they said, hi, NBC, Letterman show. And I was like, oh my God, it really is real. And he had me on the show. And a lot of news stations had me on, and I didn't do anything. I mean, it just happened. I quietly put my head down and swam, and the news followed. And
let's take you back to some of that, because some of it's
okay.
So we were on earlier today with Monique Wildschut, the great Dutch champion.
Oh, yes.
And you two were in Dover at a similar time. She might have.
Yes.
So she was talking about she had to wait on her swim until Cindy Nicholas had an attempt at her three-way. And I suspect that Cindy Nicholas did two swims that summer, one at the end of August and one with you. So it's fascinating how these three Hall of Famers kind of came together in a strange way. in the old in days past, it was common for people to do the English Channel as their first big swim. There wasn't a lot of knowledge in the sport. There weren't a lot of other great options. There weren't all of these marathons all over the world.
Yeah.
A few people do it today who have a bucket list to complete and can't be bothered to do anything. But an incredible sort of first marathon. One of the ways that you should describe this is that everyone says their English Channel swim was tough, but very few people get the CSA Endurance Award, which they gave to you after your 17+ hour swim. They don't give many of those out, and that's the referee declaring it was ugly.
And I've actually got it. There's a wall in my kitchen, and I could walk you over to it, and it has the Bonod Audnerd Award and it being presented, and both of those people are dead in that picture too. And my vellum certificate, I don't know if they still give them out. They're gorgeous, and just all the stuff on the wall. And I thought, why are they giving this to me? Because Cindy Nicholas was out there doing this amazing thing. And that was back when Ray and Audrey Scott ran the Channel Swimming Association, and Mike Reed was a doll. I think he was on number 19 or something at the time. And he said, because we thought of you as like the albatross, you just never gave up. And it wasn't so much that it was the greatest feat of endurance of the summer. It was that for you, where you were coming from, it was a remarkable feat. And I'm getting a little choked up about it because so many of these people are gone now. I mean, Mike Reed, thank God, is still alive, and he's still swimming, and he's in great shape, and we're still friends. But I was very moved, and I was very honored. And again, I did not feel worthy because there were people like Monique out there and Cindy out there. And Cindy died real young too, in her 50s, I think. It's this stuff, yeah, coming all the way back to this, it really is it's very humbling, and it's.
Let me bring you back to this idea of swimming around Manhattan twice. So somebody plants a stupid idea in your head. Who planned the swim, the tides, the crew, the boat? Who organized?
Oh, Tim Johnson. Oh, no. I didn't have Tim Johnson. Tim did it after that. Oh my God. What is his name? He was an old fisherman. He's not around anymore. Oh my God. It's written in my stories and stuff, and it's terrible. I can't think of his name. I want to say Ed. He was just like, one of those classic fishermen that you see in paintings with the old gray hair and just really gaunt and thin. And I remember the boat captain. It was Tommy Golden. Dad, of course, was on that one too. Ed Lininger. And Ed was just the guy who knew the tides. And then Tim studied the tides. Tim Johnson became a scientist about the tides. And it was part of his work, I want to say like for his PhD or something, I can't remember. But Tim turned it into a science. But Ed did it, he just read the charts and he just figured it out. And he said, this is when you start. These are the tides you have to beat. And this is when you'll end. And he was on the boat. I don't know how the boat captain and Dad and Ed managed to stay awake for the whole thing, because that one took a little over 21 hours. I mean, when you're swimming, you're swimming, so you can stay awake and you've got something to keep your mind occupied. But I always joke that watching somebody swim is the most boring thing you can possibly imagine in your life.
Did you have to tread water at one point when the currents were changing, the tides were changing?
Yeah. Back in those days, we started up near Gracie Mansion, and there's where Gracie Mansion is. There's like this little tuck-in, and it's quiet. And because I'm relatively slow, and my laps take 8.5 to 9.5 hours, of course. That's been beaten by a lot. I think Chris Rutford might hold the record now, and it's under 6 hours. But So in between, the tide wasn't going to change to go back up the Harlem for another 3.5 hours. And I swam around in circles. Jane Katz was on that, and she was leading a synchronized swimming class. And they were, and again, I couldn't touch the boat. I couldn't get on the boat. I was so religious about the rules, and we followed all of the English Channel rules. We were really careful because I didn't want anything to be blown. I wanted it to be real, and I didn't want it to be questioned by anybody. So yeah, 3.5 hours of treading water. And I remember saying in the interviews, that was the hardest part of the swim.
And 3, 4, 5 years after that, you got another crazy notion, which was to swim around Manhattan every day for 6 days. I don't know why you didn't have a crazy notion to swim around for a full week. It would have seemed symmetrical to me.
Well, God rested on the 7th day.
Okay, so where did that crazy idea come from, Julie?
Well, that was when I was working on I only wrote one book. It was called Take It to the Limit. And it was about applying the discipline that endurance athletes use to getting through anything difficult in your life. A divorce, not getting divorced, preparing your Thanksgiving dinner, anything hard, anything that took a long time. And we interviewed really cool people like David Smith, who's done just about every different thing in the world and is, I think, quite extraordinary. And I think you interviewed him last week or something. He's still an old friend. And Stu Middleman, who was a great runner. And they used to have a 6-day run where they would just run around a track for hundreds and hundreds of miles, and they would get breaks every, I don't know how frequently, to just go to the bathroom or something and get water. And then that was also the early days of the bike race across America. And God, the names are not coming to me quickly enough. But the record then was something like 9 days. That's been broken also. And I thought, okay, there's these series events, and except for the marathon, the professional marathon circuit, and Paul Asmuth was the great back in those days, where they swam a marathon in various places in the world every Sunday. I thought, if the guys can bike and if the guys can run in sequence of days, let's make up something to swim. So it came from other people doing things in other sports. And I thought, once around Manhattan each day and sleeping at night and getting a massage and having meals, well, that would be cool. And nobody had done that. And the idea really was, it was 6 days and I really thought, because God rested on the 7th, so 6 days. And the reason it turned into 5 was because the first day I hit really, really bad headwinds on the Hudson, and I didn't make the tide change. And it would have, and I just kept, that was back also when the World Trade Center was still there. And I kept looking out. I breathe on both sides like most of the long distance swimmers do. And every time I looked out of my left side, the World Trade Center wasn't getting I wasn't getting any further past it. And Dad said, you've missed the tide change. It's going to be another 6 hours. It doesn't make any sense. And I'd been in the water something like 8 hours already. And it was the first time ever I hadn't finished a swim. And to make the decision that we weren't going to make it and that the tides just beat me was very, very hard. And I said, okay, let's call it a day. And then nobody's ever done 5, so we'll start again tomorrow and do 5. And that was a Guinness Book record until a year later, when the publisher of the Guinness Book was bought, and they eliminated every Manhattan Island record in the book, which made me very angry, because there were a lot of Manhattan, the oldest swimmer, the youngest swimmer. It was terrible. And I called them and I said, what the heck just happened? My record's not there anymore. They said, oh, it's a different publishing house. They decided Manhattan wasn't that important. So that's how that one happened. They all are seemingly bizarre ideas or challenges, and they were, but they do, each one of them has clearly a little bit of a story leading up to it.
In addition to all the swimming around Manhattan, you were on that Manhattan committee in the days that took this sleepy, occasionally done swim into being one of the major marathons in the world. You know, what magic did you people come up with to turn that into a very popular event?
Well, that I have to attribute to Drury Gallagher and Tommy Hetzel and Drury's close friends. And Drury was just a driving force and kind of an amazing guy. And he started the race as a tribute to one of his sons who had died. And in the first year, I think he and 8 or 10 of his friends jumped in the water up at Gracie Mansion, and they swam around. And he said, we're going to make this an annual event and a tribute. And Joe Copeland, again, was on the committee, and he swam in my pool, and he said, you should be on this. You're an English Channel swimmer, and you should help with this. So I joined the committee, and then little by little, people started coming in from all over the country. And back then, Tim Johnson figured out the best starting time for the most people to finish. It wasn't just you pick a date and everybody jumps in the water, and if you make it, you make it, you don't, you don't. And it wasn't phasal. Everybody jumped in the water at the same time. And it was carefully plotted, and we had to plan the tide a year ahead, and it had to be on a Saturday or a Sunday, which really limited, and it had to be in the warmer months, and it had to be in the summer. So we had a team, and then Sue Peterson with, gosh, it was, I'm not going to say the right thing, but something with the Navy. And they brought their swimmers, their cadets in, and they brought in a gigantic boat that was one of the escorts. And back then too, we had to go out and solicit boaters to be captains. And Tim and I literally went all over Port Washington and Coney Island, and we had group meetings with the captains, and we explained to them how incredibly important their role was, that they would be paid, but it wouldn't be very much, that it was very boring, it was very tedious, it was long, but they were the most essential part of the swim, that without them, the swimmers couldn't do it. And we got a great crew of swimmers. And again, little by little, I think one summer we had 57 swimmers swim around the island at one time. And the majority of them were doing it. They took it very seriously. And that was when I met Shelley Thompson and Susie Moroney from Australia. And I love the story that Chris Rutford tells, because we didn't fill up and then close the field. If somebody called a week before the swim, and they were calling me because I was the key point person in New York, and I would say, yeah, sure, we have room for one more, we'll get you a boat. So and I remember Chris coming in rather late. It was a very different time, and it was some of us would put the swimmers up. It was very collegial. That's not how to pronounce the word, but you know what I mean. And it was just, I felt as though I knew every single one of them. And I would read their profiles, and I would write who was probably going to finish in the top 10. And I got pretty good at figuring out who would win. And and then eventually, because it was so much work and there were so many people, I think the 3rd or 4th year in, I became the president of the Manhattan Island Swimming Association. And then things changed a lot in 91. And my life changed. That was actually the year I found out that I had bipolar disorder, which is probably how I came up with a lot of crazy ideas. And it got completely managed, and which is why in 92, trying to swim around Barbados was also kind of about regaining my sanity and seeing that I still had it and I could still do things. And I went to graduate school and I became a social worker. And Drury had done his 10 years of mourning for his son. And he felt as though it was time to turn the organization over to somebody else. And then it became a different organization under different leadership. And it became well, I don't want to, slam anybody, but it became much more of a business proposition, and it became very expensive. And for us, we just wanted people to come in, pay for their boat. I think the entry fee was like $50 or $100 or something. I mean, I just felt as though it was a great way to meet the world and have people swim my island. And it was, I kind of, for me, it was the heyday of the swims around Manhattan.
I want to compliment you on something. When we talk to people like Monique, we get her the list of swims she did, and inevitably half of those swims, they've never really been recorded anywhere. Maybe there's a paper list somewhere with the 15 people that swam it and what their times are and what the places were. Maybe not. But there's big gaps in the history, and I want to compliment you. You contacted me about a year ago, and you said, "Look, I've got this box of records from the early days of Manhattan," and the way you described it is this box of record was the single most valuable thing that you possessed. You wanted to make sure that it got into a place for the future, and the Hall of Fame has a Henning library where those kinds of records get kept. We haven't yet made the transfer, but that'll happen soon. And just for anybody out there listening, that box of old records you have in the basement or in the attic that record who was the first one to swim across the lake or their big race in 1942, that's a history of the sport.
Ned, it's only of the 10 years of Manhattan.
Don't get in the way of my great story now, Julie. So anybody out there that has some of these gems.
Yeah, I don't want people to think I have this gold mine. And I live in a small apartment in Manhattan, so there's no attic. It's sitting up on a shelf.
This is the history of how that swim became one of the most important swims in our sport. So Julie, I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for your time today. You've been an absolute pleasure, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks so much for contacting me.